I am Nora, 33 years old, and I just handed my boss the most expensive envelope of his life. A raise you should be grateful we even keep you. He laughed, while the entire leadership team nodded. I calmly stood up, placed an envelope on his mahogany desk, and said, "Thank you for your time." They thought I was throwing away my career. They had no idea I was about to collapse their $500 million empire. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been exploited at work and had to teach them a lesson they will never forget. Working in the Chicago financial technology sector is not for the faint of heart. It is a relentless, high-stress environment where days blur into nights and your worth is calculated strictly by the revenue you generate. For 9 years, I poured my absolute soul into Vanguard Pay. I started as a junior account manager when we were barely scraping by in a cramped office. Now we occupied 3 floors of a sleek glass tower downtown. As the lead client strategist, I was the unseen backbone of the entire operation. My title sounded prestigious, but in reality it was a trap designed to keep me doing executive-level work for mid-level pay. I personally managed 80% of our core client network. I built the relationships from scratch. I stayed up until 3 in the morning fixing integration errors. I talked angry clients off the ledge when our servers went down. I was the one who knew exactly how everything worked. In the corporate world, doing the actual work rarely translates to getting the credit. That privilege belonged to Cameron. At 38 years old, Cameron was our vice president of sales. He possessed perfect hair, an expensive smile, and absolutely zero technical knowledge. His greatest talent was taking my detailed 50-page strategy reports, slapping a new title slide on them, and presenting them to the board as his own visionary ideas. Whenever a massive deal closed because of my weeks of careful negotiation, Cameron would swoop in at the final hour, shake hands, take the client out for steaks, and pocket a massive commission check. I watched him buy a new sports car every 2 years while I was still paying off student loans and living in a modest apartment. Our CEO, Bradley, fostered this exact toxic environment. At 58, Bradley was an old-school corporate shark who viewed employees as disposable assets. He and Cameron bonded over exclusive golf trips and expensive scotch while I stayed at the office eating cold takeout, ensuring the company did not fall apart. I even streamlined our entire client onboarding process, creating a custom integration protocol that saved the company millions. It was my brainchild, built entirely by my own hands, but Cameron paraded it around as his department's triumph. I tolerated the blatant disrespect because I genuinely believed hard work would eventually speak for itself. I believed in the myth of corporate meritocracy. I thought if I just kept my head down, delivered undeniable results, and proved my absolute necessity to the company, they would eventually have no choice but to reward me. That naive belief led me directly into the lion's den on a rainy Tuesday morning. It was time for my annual performance review. This marked my 9th anniversary at Vanguard Pay. I had spent the entire weekend preparing. I compiled a flawless portfolio of my achievements over the past 12 months. The numbers were absolutely irrefutable. Client retention was up 40%, strictly due to the protocols I implemented. I had personally salvaged 2 of our biggest enterprise accounts after Cameron nearly lost them through sheer incompetence. I had the data, the charts, and the profit margins all neatly bound in a heavy leather folder. I was walking into that room to request the title of Vice President of Client Success and a salary that finally matched the massive revenue I consistently generated for them. I stepped into the glass-walled conference room where Bradley and Cameron were already seated. They were laughing about some weekend trip, casually scrolling through their phones as I took my seat across the massive mahogany table. The dynamic was brutally clear before I even opened my mouth. I was an interruption to their day, not a valued asset. I placed my portfolio on the table, taking a steadying breath to calm my racing heart. I outlined my contributions, my fierce loyalty to the company, and the undeniable financial impact of my strategies over the last 9 years. I presented my request for the promotion and the corresponding compensation adjustment. I kept my voice professional, clear, and entirely confident. I expected a tough negotiation. I expected them to counter-offer. I expected a tense discussion about quarterly budgets or departmental timelines. Instead, I got a harsh reality check that shattered 9 years of misplaced loyalty in an instant. Bradley did not even bother to open the portfolio. He glanced at the cover, then looked over at Cameron. The two of them exchanged a look of shared amusement that made my stomach drop into my shoes. Bradley leaned back in his oversized leather executive chair, steepling his fingers together. He looked at me not as a dedicated employee, but as a minor nuisance who had somehow forgotten her place in the hierarchy. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance in his posture told me everything I needed to know about how they truly viewed me. They did not see the late nights. They did not see the weekends I sacrificed. They did not see the brilliant strategies that kept the company afloat and their pockets lined with cash. They only saw a worker bee who had the absolute audacity to ask for a seat at the table. The air in the room grew suffocatingly heavy and cold. I sat there looking at the two men who had built their wealth on my relentless exhaustion. I waited for Bradley to speak, hoping against hope that my years of dedication would mean something to them. But the corporate world does not run on fairness, and toxic leadership does not reward quiet loyalty. The conflict that was about to unfold in that boardroom would push me past my breaking point and set off a massive chain reaction of consequences that none of us could have ever predicted. Bradley picked up my meticulously bound portfolio. He did not open the cover. He did not glance at the executive summary I had stayed up for 3 nights perfecting. Instead, he weighed it in his hand for a brief second before carelessly tossing it across the polished mahogany table. It slid like a useless coaster, hitting Cameron's coffee cup with a dull thud. "A raise," he repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. "You want a promotion to Vice President of Client Success." He looked over at Cameron and let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Cameron chuckled, shaking his head as if I had just told a deeply inappropriate joke. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, a tie paid for by my late nights, and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Nora, let us be completely honest here." Cameron began, using that fake, sympathetic tone he reserved for difficult clients. "You are great at what you do, really top-notch. But you need to understand the reality of our business model. You are just support staff. You organize the files. You make sure the servers do not crash. You run the diagnostic checks and type up the emails after the real work is done. You are essentially a highly paid secretary for my sales team. I am the one out there shaking hands on the golf course. I am the one closing the Horizon account. I bring the money into this building. You simply process it." I sat perfectly still, listening to a man who did not even know how to log into the administrative backend of our own software claim he was the driving force behind my integrations. Cameron smirked, his confidence swelling as Bradley nodded along in agreement. "You should be grateful we even keep you around at your current salary." Cameron continued, his tone turning surprisingly vicious. "There are 100 fresh college graduates who would kill to sit in your chair for half the pay. You asking for executive compensation is frankly embarrassing. You do not have the charisma, the network, or the executive presence required to hold a vice president title. You are a behind-the-scenes worker, a reliable drone. Asking for a seat at the leadership table shows a severe lack of self-awareness. In fact, your attitude today is highly concerning." Bradley finally spoke up, his voice authoritative and cold. "Cameron is absolutely right, Nora. You lack the visionary mindset we need in our executives. You are good at following instructions and putting out small fires, but you do not drive this company forward. We pay you fairly for administrative upkeep. If you keep pushing this absurd delusion of grandeur, we might have to seriously reconsider your cultural fit within Vanguard pay altogether. Do not force my hand. Accept your lane and get back to your desk. We have a major quarterly review next week, and I expect your data reports on my desk by Friday morning." For 9 years, I had feared this exact moment. I had spent countless nights terrified that I was not working hard enough, that I needed to prove my worth just a little bit more. I used to imagine that if they ever rejected my request for advancement, I would break down in tears or lose my temper or beg for a secondary compromise. But as I sat there absorbing the sheer, unadulterated disrespect echoing off the glass walls of the conference room. I felt absolutely nothing. No tears blurred my vision. No panic tightened my chest. The desperate anxiety that had governed my entire professional life simply evaporated, leaving behind a cold, crystalline resolve. The illusion was shattered. They were never going to value me. They were always going to exploit me. I did not argue. I did not attempt to defend my record. I did not point out that Cameron had literally fumbled the Horizon pitch so badly that I had to fly to New York on a Sunday to beg their technical director not to pull their funding. Defending yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you is a profound waste of energy. I calmly reached into the inside pocket of my tailored blazer. My hand did not shake. My breathing remained perfectly steady. I pulled out a crisp white envelope completely sealed. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. The metallic scrape against the hardwood floor cut through the silence of the room. Both men stopped smiling, watching me with sudden mild confusion. I walked over to Bradley's side of the table and placed the sealed envelope squarely in the center of his immaculate leather desk pad. I looked him dead in the eyes, making sure he saw the absolute absence of fear. "Thank you for your time, gentlemen," I said, my voice dropping an octave, steady and chillingly polite. "I appreciate the absolute clarity you have provided today. It has made my next steps incredibly simple." I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. I did not slam the door. I did not storm out. I walked with the measured, powerful stride of a woman who finally knew her exact net worth. Behind me, the heavy glass door swung shut, but it did not block out the sound of their reaction. Through the glass panels, I watched the immediate aftermath of my departure. Bradley picked up the envelope, turning it over in his hands before tossing it back onto the desk with a scoff. He leaned back and burst into boisterous laughter. Cameron joined in, slapping the table. Another dramatic millennial, Bradley snorted loudly enough for his voice to carry through the gap in the doorframe. "She actually thinks she is irreplaceable. Let her throw her little tantrum." Cameron chuckled, leaning back and putting his expensive Italian leather shoes up on the edge of the conference table. "It is an empty bluff," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "She has zero leverage and no social skills to land an executive job anywhere else. Do not even bother opening whatever dramatic resignation letter she just handed you. Give her the weekend to panic about her rent. She will be sitting in the Human Resources office by Monday morning, crying and begging for her job back. Let her sweat it out. It will teach her a valuable lesson about knowing her place." They laughed again, entirely convinced of their own untouchable supremacy. They assumed the envelope contained a standard 2 weeks' notice. They assumed I was just a frustrated employee having an emotional breakdown. They had absolutely no clue that the envelope on that desk was a ticking time bomb. They were too arrogant to realize that by dismissing me as mere support staff, they had just handed me the keys to their entire kingdom. They thought they had put me in my place, but they had actually just unleashed a financial catastrophe that would rip their company apart from the inside out. I walked back to my desk, my mind already 10 steps ahead. By the time I reached my cubicle, Brenda, the director of human resources, was already marching toward me. She wore a self-satisfied smirk, her heels clicking loudly against the polished floor. Bradley must have messaged her the second I left the conference room. Brenda had always resented me. She hated that I bypassed her bureaucratic red tape to get things done, and she clearly relished this moment. "Nora," Brenda said, crossing her arms, "Bradley informed me you have decided to terminate your employment. Company policy dictates that I escort you off the premises immediately. I need your keycard and your company laptop right now." I did not argue. I handed her the laptop and my keycard without a single word of protest. I pulled a cardboard box from under my desk and began packing. Brenda hovered over my shoulder, watching my every move like a hawk. She expected me to break down. She expected me to beg for a grace period. I gave her absolutely nothing. I packed my framed photos, my coffee mug, and my ergonomic mouse with silent mechanical precision. "You are making a massive mistake," Brenda whispered, leaning in close. "You think you are special, but you will be replaced by Friday. Nobody survives jumping ship without a backup plan." I zipped my bag closed, picked up my box, and looked right through her. "Brenda." I replied, my voice perfectly level. You are about to have the busiest weekend of your entire career. Good luck. I walked to the elevator, the heavy box secure in my arms. I did not look back. The elevator doors slid shut, severing my physical tie to Vanguard pay forever. Stepping out onto the bustling Chicago street, the cold afternoon air hit my face, and I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. I was free. But the battle was far from over. I still had to survive Friday night dinner with my family. I drove my sedan out of the city, heading toward the affluent suburb of Oak Brook. The towering skyscrapers gradually gave way to sprawling estates with perfectly manicured lawns and wrought iron gates. My parents lived in a grand colonial-style house that served as a monument to their obsession with social status. Growing up, our home was less of a sanctuary and more of a showroom designed to impress their wealthy country club friends. My father was a retired corporate banker who measured human value strictly by income brackets. My mother was a socialite whose existence revolved around neighborhood gossip and maintaining the illusion of absolute perfection. They demanded flawless academic records and lucrative career paths from their children. But more importantly, they demanded total obedience. I parked in the wide circular driveway behind a gleaming new sports utility vehicle. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the emotional gauntlet ahead. Family dinners were mandatory, a monthly ritual where my parents held court and distributed their conditional love based on who had pleased them the most. I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped into the grand foyer. The house smelled of expensive catering and tension. I walked down the long hallway, the sound of clinking crystal and boisterous conversation growing louder. As I entered the dining room, the dynamic was instantly recognizable. The table was set with fine china, but the real centerpiece of the evening was sitting at the head of the table, commanding everyone's absolute attention. My older brother Connor sat holding a glass of expensive wine, gesturing grandly as he finished telling a story. At 36 years old, Connor was the undisputed golden child of our family. He had inherited my father's arrogant posture and my mother's desperate need for external validation. Connor was a regional director at a prominent logistics firm, a job he had secured entirely through my father's golfing connections. Connor lacked actual business acumen, but he excelled at corporate politics and taking credit for other people's labor. In my parents' eyes, he could do absolutely no wrong. Every mediocre milestone he achieved was celebrated like a monumental triumph. He was the son destined to carry the family legacy, while I was simply the daughter expected to stay quietly in the background. Connor let out a booming laugh, leaning back in his heavily cushioned chair. "And that is how you close a 7-figure logistics deal," he announced, raising his glass high. "You have to dominate the room. You cannot let the client breathe until they sign on the dotted line." My father beamed with absolute pride, raising his own glass in a toast. "That is my boy, a true shark. You are going to be running that entire company by next year, Connor. Mark my words." My mother reached over and patted Connor's hand, her eyes shining with blind adoration. "We are just so incredibly proud of you. Your success is a testament to how hard you work." I stood in the doorway entirely unnoticed for a long moment. Across the table, sitting quietly beside Connor, was his wife, Naomi. Naomi was a brilliant intellectual property lawyer, a striking African-American woman who possessed a razor-sharp intellect that my family completely underestimated. She met my gaze, offering a small, knowing smile. Naomi was the only person in this house who saw through the toxic facade. She knew exactly how incompetent Connor truly was, and she knew exactly how much my parents favored him over me. "Ah, look who finally decided to show up," Connor said loudly, pointing his wine glass in my direction. "The support staff graces us with her presence." "Did Vanguard make you stay late to clean the coffee machine, Nora?" My parents chuckled at his cruel joke. My mother waved me toward the empty seat at the far end of the table. "Sit down, Nora," she instructed dismissively. "Do not interrupt your brother. He was just telling us about his massive new contract negotiations. You could learn a thing or two about real corporate success if you actually listen to him." I pulled out my chair and sat down, smoothing my napkin over my lap. I looked at Connor's smug face, then at my parents' approving smiles. I had lost my job. I had faced immense humiliation at the hands of terrible men. But nothing prepared me for the betrayal that was about to unfold in my own childhood home. The maid cleared our plates as Connor continued to monopolize the conversation, bragging about his luxury car lease and the expensive renovations he was doing on his new condo. My father nodded along, taking slow, methodical sips of his vintage Cabernet. I stared at my empty plate, feeling the heavy physical exhaustion of the long day settling deep into my bones. The sheer absurdity of sitting here listening to my brother gloat while my entire professional life had just been upended became far too much to bear in silence. My mother asked me how work was going purely out of obligation. Normally, I would give a generic, pleasant answer and fade immediately into the background. Tonight, I refused to play the game. I do not work at Vanguard Pay anymore, I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the ambient noise of clinking silverware. I officially quit this afternoon. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. My mother froze with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. My father slowly lowered his fork. Naomi shifted slightly in her chair, her sharp eyes darting between me and Connor. Connor just stared at me, his smug expression instantly replaced by sheer panic. "What do you mean you quit?" my father demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerously low register. "People do not just quit corporate jobs on a Tuesday afternoon, Nora. What exactly did you do?" Notice how he immediately assumed I was at fault. "I asked for a promotion and a raise," I explained calmly. "I have essentially been running the client strategy division for 3 years. Bradley and Cameron not only refused my request, but they completely disrespected my contributions, so I handed them my resignation. I am no longer willing to let Vanguard Pay exploit my labor." I expected a fraction of sympathy. Instead, my mother slammed her wine glass down on the table so hard the stem nearly snapped. "You did what?" she shrieked, her carefully maintained socialite facade shattering instantly. "Are you completely out of your mind, Nora? Do you have any idea how bad this makes us look? You threw away a perfectly good job because your feelings were hurt over a promotion." Before I could even process her ridiculous statement, Connor slammed both of his fists onto the dining table, making the fine china rattle. His face was turning an alarming shade of red. "You stupid, selfish idiot!" Connor roared, standing up from his chair. "Do you have any earthly idea what you have just done?" I recoiled slightly, taken aback by the sheer violence in his reaction. Connor had always been arrogant, but this level of unhinged fury was entirely new. "My employment status has absolutely nothing to do with you, Connor," I fired back, refusing to back down. "It has everything to do with me, you absolute moron," he screamed. "My logistics firm has been courting Vanguard Pay for 6 months. 6 months of me taking Bradley out to dinner, taking him golfing, sending him expensive gifts. We are literally days away from signing a $5 million supply chain contract. It is the biggest deal of my entire career. I am supposed to be named partner if this goes through." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. That was why Connor was so confident earlier. That was why my father was celebrating. They were banking on Vanguard Pay, and Vanguard Pay was run by the man I had just humiliated. "Bradley knows you are my sister," Connor continued, pacing behind his chair. "I literally sold him on this deal by talking about how you were a loyal asset to his team. You were my inside connection. And now you just marched into his office, threw a temper tantrum, and quit. He is going to be furious. He will pull the entire contract just out of spite." "You are blaming me because your deal is fragile?" I asked. "If your logistics firm is competent, Bradley will sign the contract regardless of my employment status. If he pulls a $5 million deal just because I quit, then your business model is a joke." "Shut your mouth!" Connor snapped, his face contorted in rage. "You do not know anything about high-level business. You are just a glorified secretary who got a big head." My father slammed his hand on the table, demanding silence. He looked at me with an expression of pure disgust, as if I was a stranger who had just walked into his home. "Your brother is right, Nora," my father said, his voice cold. "This is unacceptable behavior. You are jeopardizing the family legacy for your own selfish pride." I will not allow you to ruin Connor's future over a petty workplace squabble. My pride, I echoed. They told me I was nothing. They laughed in my face. And you are telling me I should just accept that so Connor can get a bonus. I am telling you exactly what you are going to do, my father replied, pointing a heavy finger at me. You will go home and write a formal apology letter. On Monday morning, you will walk back into Vanguard Pay. You will get down on your knees and you will beg Bradley for your job back. You will tell him you were emotional and you will accept whatever position he gives you. Connor leaned over the table, pointing his finger directly in my face. You will fix this, Nora, he ordered, his voice dripping with absolute venom. You will grovel to Bradley and make sure my highly lucrative contract gets signed immediately. If you ruin my big deal, I swear I will make your miserable life a living hell. My mother crossed her arms, looking down her nose at me. Listen to your brother, Nora. If you refuse to fix this mess, do not bother coming back to this house. We will not support a daughter who actively tries to destroy her own brother's success. If you let that contract fall through, you are cut off entirely. Do you understand me? I looked at the three of them. My father, the enforcer. My mother, the enabler. My brother, the golden parasite. They were entirely willing to sacrifice my dignity and my career just to pad Connor's bank account. They did not care about my happiness. They only cared about how my utility could serve them. But my eyes drifted past my furious blood relatives and landed on the only other person at the table. Naomi sat perfectly still, her posture immaculate, her expression entirely unreadable. At 34 years old, Naomi was a force of nature, dressed in a tailored emerald green dress that contrasted sharply with the stark beige aesthetic of my parents' home. As a highly successful African-American intellectual property lawyer, she navigated corporate bloodbaths for a living. She knew how to read a room better than anyone I had ever met. She had watched the entire explosive argument unfold without uttering a single syllable. She did not nod in agreement with my parents. She did not try to soothe Connor's bruised ego. She simply observed. Her dark eyes were sharp, calculating, absorbing every single piece of data being presented. In a family that communicated entirely through screaming matches and emotional manipulation, Naomi's absolute silence was the loudest statement in the room. I knew my brother resented his wife's intelligence even as he benefited from her massive salary. My parents tolerated her because her prestigious career looked fantastic on their country club social resume. But right now, in this hostile environment, she was an island of pure rational calculation. For a brief second, our eyes met across the crystal glasses and half-eaten prime rib. She did not offer a pitying smile. Instead, she gave me a microscopic nod. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture of solidarity. I pushed my chair back from the table. The wooden legs scraped harshly against the imported marble floor, breaking the heavy silence. I am not going back to Vanguard Pay, I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I am not apologizing to Bradley, and I am certainly not taking responsibility for a fragile business deal that Connor cannot close on his own merit. My father slammed his fist down again, but I did not flinch. If you walk out that door, you are done with this family. My mother threatened, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. Do not expect us to bail you out when you are living on the street, Nora. I am 33 years old, I replied calmly. I have never asked you for a single dime. Enjoy your evening. I turned my back on them and walked out of the dining room. I did not run. I marched down the long hallway toward the grand foyer, my head held high. The physical relief of finally severing that lifelong toxic cord was intoxicating. I felt completely alienated, utterly alone, but dangerously free. I reached the coat closet and pulled out my heavy wool trench coat. As I was sliding my arms into the sleeves, I heard the soft, rapid click of heels on the hardwood floor behind me. I turned to see Naomi rushing down the hallway. She glanced back quickly over her shoulder to ensure the dining room doors were fully closed and none of my family members had followed her. Her usual composed demeanor was replaced by a quiet, urgent intensity. Naomi, I started to say, thinking she was coming to act as a peacemaker on behalf of her pathetic husband. She held up a finger, instantly silencing me. She stepped directly into my personal space, moving quickly and smoothly. Without saying a word, she reached out and embraced me. It was a brief, stiff hug that felt entirely out of character for our usually formal relationship. But as her arms wrapped around my shoulders, I felt her hand slide swiftly into the right pocket of my trench coat. She pressed a small, folded square of heavy paper deep into the fabric. She pulled back just as quickly, smoothing the lapels of her green dress. Her face was perfectly blank again, a masterclass in emotional control. "Drive safe." "Nora," she said loud enough for her voice to carry down the hallway, just in case anyone was listening. "I am sorry the dinner had to end this way." Before I could even process what had just happened, she turned on her heel and walked gracefully back toward the dining room, disappearing behind the heavy oak doors to rejoin the lion's den. I stood in the foyer for a second, my heart pounding a strange new rhythm against my ribs. I shoved my hands deep into my coat pockets, and my fingers immediately brushed against the sharp edges of the folded paper. I kept my hand closed around it, tightly gripping the hidden object as I opened the front door and stepped out into the freezing Chicago night. The cold air shocked my system, but I walked swiftly to my sedan parked in the wide circular driveway. I unlocked the doors, climbed into the driver's seat, and locked them instantly behind me. I did not turn the key in the ignition. I sat in the dark driveway, listening to the wind rattle the bare branches of the oak trees above me. My hands were shaking, not from the cold and not from the argument, but from a sudden, massive surge of adrenaline. I pulled my hand out of my coat pocket. Under the dim yellow glow of the car dome light, I stared at the small folded square of thick cream-colored cardstock. It was one of Naomi's professional stationery cards. I carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, sharp, and written in bold black ink. There was no greeting. There was no signature. It contained only 3 short sentences. "There is a fatal loophole in your employment contract. Meet me at the downtown coffee shop. Tomorrow, 7 in the morning." I read the words 3 times, my brain desperately trying to catch up with the implications. Naomi was an intellectual property lawyer. She dealt exclusively with corporate contracts, patents, and software ownership rights. If she saw a loophole in a contract, it was not a minor clerical error. It was a weapon. She had sat quietly at that dinner table, listening to Connor brag about his fragile Vanguard pay logistics deal, listening to my parents try to force me back into submission, all while knowing she held the exact key to my revenge. My brother thought his wife was just a pretty accessory for his corporate dinners. My parents thought she was just a status symbol. They were all completely blind to the brilliant tactical mind operating right under their noses. Naomi was not just an observer, she was a lethal corporate strategist, and she had just chosen a side. A slow, cold smile spread across my face, changing my entire demeanor in the dark, quiet car. I was not just a discarded employee anymore. I was not an obedient sister bending to the will of a toxic family. I was an independent variable they had entirely failed to account for. I carefully folded the note and tucked it safely into the center console of my car. I turned the ignition, listening to the engine roar to life. Tomorrow at 7 in the morning, the rules of engagement were going to change permanently. Monday morning arrived with a brutal cold front sweeping off Lake Michigan, rattling the windows of my apartment. I had spent the entire weekend methodically preparing my counter-offensive in the job market. I updated my executive portfolio, polished my resume, and reached out to 4 elite headhunters who had previously begged me to jump ship. I was highly qualified. I possessed the exact technical knowledge that every competing financial technology firm in Chicago desperately needed. I woke up at 5 in the morning, made a pot of black coffee, and sat at my kitchen island, fully expecting my inbox to be flooded with preliminary interview requests. I opened my laptop and logged into my professional email account. My inbox was a complete graveyard. Instead of interview confirmations, I found a string of automated cancellation notices. 3 major recruitment agencies had abruptly terminated our scheduled phone calls, citing a sudden shift in their client's strategic direction. I frowned, taking a slow sip of my coffee. The excuses were identical. The timing was entirely too perfectly synchronized. I opened my professional networking profile expecting to see messages from my industry contacts. Instead, I discovered that two executive recruiters who had been actively courting me for a lucrative director role had completely blocked my profile. The digital silence was deafening. The panic began as a slow, cold drip in the back of my mind, but my analytical brain immediately searched for the variable that had changed. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. He was a senior technical recruiter I had known for 5 years, a man who owed his biggest placement commissions directly to my private recommendations. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding incredibly tense and actively avoiding my cheerful greeting. "Marcus," I said, dropping the pleasantries entirely. "What exactly is going on? My entire schedule just evaporated overnight." There was a heavy, exhausted sigh on the other end of the line. "Nora," he said, his voice hushed, as if he was afraid someone in his office might hear him speaking to me. "You need to pull all of your applications immediately, right now, cancel everything." Why? I demanded, my grip tightening on my ceramic coffee mug. "Because you are legally radioactive right now," Marcus replied bluntly. Bradley sent out a highly classified email blast to the Executive Human Resources Network late last night. He claimed you were escorted out of the Vanguard Pay building by security for attempted corporate data theft. He said you exhibited highly unstable and erratic behavior during a performance review, and that you were a severe liability. He legally covered himself by phrasing the email as a confidential industry warning about a compromised internal employee. Cameron has been calling every sales director in his golf network, backing up the story. He is telling them you suffered a complete mental breakdown. You are blacklisted, Nora. Nobody in the Chicago sector is going to touch your resume with a 10-foot pole. Not until this blows over, and frankly, a data theft accusation never truly blows over. He hung up the phone before I could ask another question, leaving me listening to the dead dial tone. I sat in the dim morning light, staring directly at my blank computer screen. Bradley and Cameron were not just satisfied with denying my worth and keeping my hard-earned money. They wanted to permanently destroy my livelihood. They were actively salting the earth so nothing else could ever grow for me in this city. They wanted to ensure I would be entirely destitute, forced to crawl back to them on my hands and knees. Right on cue, my phone buzzed aggressively, vibrating against the cold marble countertop. It was a rapid-fire barrage of text messages from Connor. I opened the message thread, and the absolute venom in his words jumped off the screen. "Bradley called me last night." Connor wrote his messages, appearing in quick, rapid bursts. "He is furious. He officially pulled the logistics contract. He said the only way he signs the paperwork with my firm is if you march into his office today and beg for his absolute forgiveness. He wants you to return to your desk and work directly under Cameron for zero salary as penance for your little tantrum. If you do not do this, my career is entirely over. You ruined my life, you selfish bitch. Fix this today, or I will personally make sure you never recover from this." A second later, my parents sent a single follow-up message in our family group chat. "Do exactly what your brother says today, or you are permanently dead to us." The walls of my apartment suddenly felt incredibly small. The air grew thin and difficult to breathe. I was completely backed into a corner. My entire industry had locked its doors and thrown away the key based on a malicious, fabricated lie. My own blood relatives were actively participating in my psychological torture, entirely willing to offer me up as a sacrificial lamb to a corporate tyrant just so they could maintain their affluent lifestyle. The sheer isolation hit me like a physical blow. A heavy, suffocating weight pressed down on my chest, threatening to crush me entirely. I had played by all the rules my entire life. I had worked harder than anyone else in that office. I had been loyal, quiet, and strictly obedient, and my reward was total, absolute annihilation. I closed my eyes, letting the sheer weight of the despair wash over me. I allowed myself 1 minute to feel the crushing grief of being abandoned by everyone I thought I knew. But as the panic peaked, reaching its absolute zenith, something inside my chest snapped. The despair instantly evaporated, leaving behind a white-hot, burning resolve. I opened my eyes and my vision was remarkably clear. They thought they had trapped me. They thought stripping away my job and my reputation and my family would leave me completely powerless. But they forgot one crucial detail about human nature. When you take away everything a person has left to lose, you remove their fear entirely. A cornered animal with no escape route is the most dangerous thing in the room. I looked at the digital clock on my oven. It flashed 6:15 in bright green numbers. I grabbed my trench coat, my car keys, and walked out the door into the freezing morning air. It was time to meet Naomi and burn their entire empire to the ground. The drive downtown was a blur of gray concrete and flashing traffic lights. I parked my sedan in a damp alleyway across from an upscale artisan coffee shop tucked quietly beneath the shadow of the financial district's skyscrapers. It was exactly 6:50 in the morning. The city was just beginning to wake up, but the interior of the cafe was entirely devoid of the usual morning rush. I pushed open the heavy glass door. The bell chimed softly, slicing through the low hum of the espresso machines. Naomi was already sitting at a small corner table, entirely isolated from the front windows. She wore a sharp charcoal blazer, her laptop open in front of her, alongside a thick manila folder. She was not drinking coffee. She was actively typing, her eyes scanning the screen with lethal precision. I walked over and dropped into the wooden chair across from her, keeping my trench coat buttoned against the residual chill in my bones. We did not exchange pleasantries. We did not discuss the disastrous family dinner or my brother's unhinged screaming match. Naomi closed her laptop with a soft click and pushed the heavy manila folder across the small wooden table until it rested directly in front of me. Bradley initiated a full industry blacklist against me last night, I said, keeping my voice low. He accused me of data theft. Connor sent me a barrage of threats an hour ago saying Bradley pulled the logistics contract. They are trying to starve me out completely, so I am forced to crawl back to my desk and work for free. Naomi did not look surprised. In fact, the corners of her mouth twitched upward into a microscopic predatory smile. Of course he did. Naomi replied, her voice cool and perfectly modulated. Bradley is operating entirely on panic. The smear campaign, the sudden contract cancellation, the threats directed at your family. None of this is about your performance review, Nora. It is not about his bruised ego or Cameron feeling disrespected. Bradley is a corporate shark, but he is a cowardly one. He only attacks aggressively when he is terrified of losing everything. I frowned, staring at the blank cover of the folder. What could he possibly lose? He runs a massive fintech firm. I was just his lead strategist. Open the folder, Naomi instructed, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. I flipped open the heavy cardstock cover. Inside were dozens of printed emails, heavily redacted financial statements, and what looked like a preliminary corporate prospectus. The logo printed at the top of the central document made my heart skip a beat. It was the bold, minimalist crest of Apex Global. Apex was the largest tech conglomerate in the Western Hemisphere. They bought successful software companies, gutted their leadership, and integrated their technology into massive global networks. I used my legal clearance to run a quiet background check on Vanguard Pay yesterday afternoon, Naomi explained, her eyes never leaving my face. Vanguard is currently operating under a strict ironclad non-disclosure agreement. For the past 4 months, Bradley has been secretly negotiating a total company buyout. Apex Global is in the absolute final stages of acquiring Vanguard Pay. The closing documents are scheduled to be signed a week from Friday. My mind struggled to process the sheer magnitude of the information. Apex is buying Vanguard. I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. For how much? $500 million, Naomi said, stating the staggering number as casually as if she were ordering a latte. The coffee shop suddenly felt incredibly warm. I stared at the financial projections printed on the crisp white paper. 500 million. Bradley and Cameron were about to walk away with generational wealth, while simultaneously telling me I was greedy for asking for a standard corporate raise. The sheer audacity of their greed was sickening, but it still did not explain the sheer violence of their retaliation against me. If they are about to become multimillionaires, why do they care if I quit? I asked, looking up at Naomi. Why coordinate a massive industry blacklist to ruin my life over a resignation? Because Apex Global is not buying Vanguard pay for its sales department, Naomi stated, leaning forward, her dark eyes locking onto mine. Apex does not care about Cameron's golf networking or Bradley's client list. Apex already has the biggest client list in the world. They are acquiring Vanguard for one specific reason and one reason only. They want the custom integration algorithm, the software architecture that makes Vanguard process transactions faster than any other competitor on the market. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. The custom integration algorithm, the exact software protocol I had built from absolutely nothing, the code I had debugged at 3 in the morning while Cameron was out drinking, the system I had streamlined and perfected to save the company from bankruptcy 2 years ago. Bradley is actively trying to sell my algorithm, I said, my hands balling into fists on top of the table. He is trying to sell your algorithm, Naomi corrected sharply, but he has a massive fatal problem. During the due diligence phase, Apex Global will conduct a forensic audit of all intellectual property. They will trace the code back to its original creator to ensure the licensing is entirely clean. Bradley knows exactly who wrote that code, Nora. He knows you built the entire framework. He knows that without you in the building, his $500 million house of cards collapses instantly. The entire puzzle snapped together with brutal clarity. The fake performance review was never about my attitude. It was a calculated attempt to keep my salary low and my confidence shattered so I would remain quietly obedient until the ink on the Apex contract was dry. When I handed Bradley that envelope and walked out, I unknowingly pulled the pin on a $500 million grenade. He panicked. I said the words flowing rapidly as my analytical brain shifted into high gear. When I quit, he realized I was no longer under his direct control. He launched the smear campaign and accused me of data theft to immediately discredit me in the eyes of the industry. He wants to frame me as a disgruntled, unstable former employee, so if I try to contact Apex or claim ownership of the code, no one will believe me. Exactly. Naomi nodded, her expression filled with cold satisfaction. He squeezed Connor's logistics contract to force your family to pressure you. He wants you isolated, terrified, and entirely compliant. He needs you to return to the office this week and sign an updated non-disclosure agreement under extreme duress. He is trying to lock you in a legally binding cage before Apex discovers he is trying to sell them stolen goods. I looked down at the Apex Global logo resting on the table. For 9 years, I had let Bradley and Cameron convince me I was nothing but a background character in their success story. But they were the ones who were terrified. They were the ones desperately trying to cover their tracks. He really thinks he can steal my work and sell it for $500 million, I said, my voice dropping into a deadly calm register. He thinks because I am a woman who always kept her head down that I will just roll over and let him rob me blind. Naomi reached across the table and tapped her manicured fingernail directly on the Apex prospectus. He made a severe miscalculation, Nora. He assumed you did not have competent legal representation. I looked up at my brilliant sister-in-law, the only person in my entire life who had ever truly seen my potential. What is our next move? I asked, ready to declare absolute war. Naomi opened the folder and pulled out a copy of my original employment contract. She smoothed the slightly yellowed paper against the wooden surface. I need you to answer a few specific questions, Nora, she said, her tone shifting to a ruthless cross-examining attorney. When exactly did you write the initial source code for the client integration algorithm? It was during the winter of my 5th year at Vanguard, I replied. The old system was crashing every Friday, and we were losing clients rapidly. I spent 3 months of my own weekends completely rewriting the architecture from the ground up. Did you write the code in the Vanguard office? Naomi asked. No, I said. The office servers were too unstable to handle the load. I did it entirely at my apartment on my kitchen table. Did you use your company-issued laptop to write the code? Naomi pressed, her expression intense. I almost laughed. Vanguard gave us base model laptops that could barely run standard software without freezing. I had to use my own personal custom-built desktop computer to compile the heavy code. I brought the finished product into the office on a personal flash drive. A massive, triumphant smile broke across Naomi's face. She tapped her manicured fingernail against a paragraph on the 4th page. Bradley used a generic boilerplate employment contract he downloaded from the internet to save money, she declared. Read Clause 7, Section B. I leaned in and scanned the dense legal jargon. The text stated that Vanguard claimed exclusive ownership over any intellectual property developed by an employee during regular business hours while utilizing company property. I read it 3 times. Do you see the fatal flaw? Naomi asked. A standard tech contract includes a blanket intellectual property assignment clause, stating the company owns anything you invent, regardless of where or how you built it. But Bradley's outdated cheap contract only claims ownership if you used company time and company equipment. You used your own computer on your own weekends. You brought the finished product in as an independent asset. Are you telling me Vanguard does not own the algorithm? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. I am telling you that you hold the sole exclusive copyright to the entire framework, Naomi said, her eyes shining with predatory brilliance. Vanguard never owned it. They have been using unlicensed pirated software for 4 years. Bradley is trying to sell your intellectual property to Apex Global for $500 million without your consent. The entire picture was finally complete. The fake performance review, the sudden extreme hostility, the industry blacklist, and the vicious threats against my family were not random. It was a highly orchestrated campaign of terror designed to force me into absolute submission. He needs me to sign a new contract, I whispered, staring blankly. When I quit, he panicked. If I am not an active employee, he cannot force me to sign a retroactive intellectual property assignment. He knows Apex Global will demand a clean chain of title during their final legal audit. If he cannot produce my signature signing over the rights, the entire deal completely collapses. Exactly, Naomi nodded. He is trying to destroy your life, so you have absolutely no choice but to crawl back. He will offer your job back and bury a retroactive intellectual property transfer clause deep in the reinstatement paperwork. He expects you to be so desperate and broken that you will sign it without reading it. He wants to steal your masterpiece and leave you with nothing. A cold, heavy silence descended over our table. The sheer malicious greed of the men I had devoted 9 years of my life to was almost impossible to fully comprehend. They wanted to strip mine, my intellect, steal my creation, and discard me in the gutter. I thought about Cameron driving his expensive sports cars. I thought about Bradley treating me like dirt. I thought about my brother Connor screaming in my face, demanding I sacrifice my dignity for his promotion. They all thought I was a compliant little worker bee who would simply surrender. They expected me to break. They messed with the wrong woman, I said, my voice dropping into a deadly, icy calm. I am not just going to stop the acquisition. I want to take everything from them. I want to tear Vanguard apart piece by piece. Naomi smiled, her expression mirroring my absolute resolve. I was hoping you would say that, because I have already drafted the initial paperwork to form your new private limited liability company. She pulled out a fresh stack of legal documents. We are going to officially register the copyright and all corresponding patents directly under your new company, she explained, crisp and professional. We will build an impenetrable legal wall around your asset. Every single line of code will trace strictly back to your absolute ownership. And then what do we do? I asked, feeling a massive surge of adrenaline. Then we wait, Naomi said, leaning forward. We let Bradley think his smear campaign is working. We let him sweat as the Apex closing date gets closer and closer. He will get desperate. And when the timing is absolutely perfect, we drop the legal hammer. What exactly is the hammer? I asked. We hit them with a formal, legally binding cease and desist order alongside a notice of license termination, Naomi stated. We give them exactly 24 hours to stop using your proprietary software. They will ignore it, assuming you have no real legal backing. And when the 24 hours expire, you use your master administrative access to remotely lock them out of the entire system. My breath caught in my throat. If I lock the system, Vanguard cannot process a single transaction, I said. The entire company will go completely dark, and Apex Global will instantly realize they are buying a fraudulent company, Naomi finished. The acquisition will instantly dissolve. Bradley will face federal fraud charges. Cameron will be permanently blacklisted, and Connor's precious contract will evaporate into thin air. Your brother will finally learn that he cannot bully his way through life. I looked down at the thick stack of legal documents resting on the wooden table. For my entire life, I had played by the rules, holding everything together for everyone else. But the rules were rigged by greedy men who only respected raw power. It was time to show them exactly what real power looked like. "Where do I sign?" I asked, picking up the black pen. I pressed the black pen against the thick parchment paper and signed my name. With that single signature, my new private limited liability company was officially born. Naomi immediately went to work, transforming from a quiet observer into a ruthless legal general. The next 72 hours became a blur of highly calculated tactical warfare. We did not sleep. We operated out of the coffee shop during the day and my small apartment at night, fueled by black coffee and the pure adrenaline of impending vengeance. Naomi utilized every high-level connection she had established in the Chicago intellectual property network. She filed an emergency expedited copyright application for the entire source code of the integration algorithm, submitting the massive files directly to the Federal Registry. Because she knew exactly which legal channels to push, she managed to bypass the standard waiting periods that usually took months. She drafted airtight patent applications, locking down the unique operational mechanics of the software. Every document was filed strictly under my new corporate entity. I was no longer just an employee identification number in the Vanguard system. I was the sole proprietor of a heavily fortified tech asset. While Naomi built the impenetrable legal wall, I went to work locking down the digital trap. I booted up my custom-built desktop computer, the exact machine I had used to write the original code 4 years ago. I isolated the original file directories, meticulously extracting the exact creation timestamps. I gathered the initial server logs, the early beta test results, and the independent domain registrations I had purchased with my own personal credit card. Every digital footprint pointed directly back to my living room. Vanguard had absolutely nothing. They possessed no original drafting notes, no internal development emails, and no proof of corporate sponsorship. I had been entirely invisible to them while I was building it, which meant they had no way to prove they owned it now. I accessed the master administrative portal for the Vanguard Pay Integration Network using my personal encrypted key. I did not shut the system down yet. That would be premature. Instead, I quietly fortified the back-end architecture. I rewrote the access protocols, ensuring that nobody in the Vanguard Information Technology Department could override my master credentials. I built a digital kill switch, burying it deep within the core framework. Once activated, it would trigger an irreversible cryptographic lock on the entire client database. I set the activation sequence to require a specific manual input from my exact Internet Protocol address. The trap was perfectly set. The jaws were open, and Bradley was blissfully unaware that he was walking directly into them. With the legal and technical walls completely sealed, we transitioned into the most difficult phase of the operation, the waiting game. I had to remain an absolute ghost. By Wednesday morning, the digital silence was shattered. Bradley and Cameron had clearly realized that their smear campaign was not forcing me into immediate submission. I was not showing up at the office begging for my job. I was not calling them in tears. The realization that I was entirely off the grid must have triggered a massive internal panic within the executive suite. They needed me to sign that retroactive non-disclosure agreement before Apex Global sent their final audit team on Friday. I sat at my kitchen island watching my personal email inbox begin to flood. The first message arrived at 9 in the morning from the Vanguard Pay Internal Legal Counsel. It was phrased as a polite but firm corporate reminder. They requested that I immediately turn over all company passwords and administrative login credentials as part of standard offboarding procedures. They offered to send a courier to my apartment to collect the hardware. I read the email, took a sip of my herbal tea, and deleted it. 2 hours later, a second email arrived. This one abandoned the polite corporate tone entirely. It was marked highly urgent and copied Bradley Cameron and the head of human resources. The legal counsel claimed I was actively withholding vital company assets and demanded immediate compliance. They vaguely threatened to withhold my final paycheck if I did not respond within the hour. I smiled, looking at the pathetic attempt at financial leverage. They truly believed a single paycheck still mattered to me. I moved the email directly to the trash folder. By Thursday afternoon, the emails escalated into pure, unadulterated desperation. The subject lines were written in all capital letters. They were no longer pretending this was a standard offboarding procedure. Bradley's personal assistant sent a frantic message demanding I answer my phone. The legal team sent a massive block of text explicitly accusing me of corporate sabotage and threatening to file a federal lawsuit by the end of the business day if I did not instantly transmit the master encryption keys. They cited the exact boilerplate contract Naomi and I had already dismantled. They claimed Vanguard owned everything I had ever touched, and that my silence was an admission of guilt. It was incredibly satisfying to watch their supposed absolute power crumble into frantic begging. They were throwing empty legal threats against a brick wall, hoping something would stick. They had no idea that while they were frantically drafting angry emails, my attorney was holding federal copyright certificates bearing my newly formed company name. My phone lit up again, vibrating against the counter. It was another text message from Connor. My brother was clearly acting as Bradley's desperate proxy. "Please, Nora," Connor wrote. "Bradley is losing his mind. The servers are lagging and the technical team cannot fix it without your passwords. Just give them the logins. I will give you $5,000 out of my own pocket if you just give them the codes right now so I can get my logistics contract signed. Do not ruin my life over your petty grudge." I stared at the message, feeling absolutely nothing for the man who shared my genetics. He was willing to bribe me with spare change while actively helping Bradley steal $500 million from me. I blocked Connor's phone number permanently. I placed my phone face down on the counter and turned my attention back to Naomi, who was sitting across the kitchen island, reviewing the final legal paperwork. Everything was completely locked in place. The silence from my end was driving them insane, and their arrogant impatience was about to be their ultimate downfall. The heavy silence of my apartment was violently shattered by a sudden aggressive pounding on my front door. The sheer force of the knocks made the wooden frame rattle violently on its hinges. I jumped slightly, dropping my pen onto the marble counter. Naomi instantly went on high alert. She swiftly gathered the stack of confidential legal documents, sliding them seamlessly into her leather briefcase. Without saying a single word, she stepped back, moving silently down the short hallway and slipping into my guest bedroom. She pulled the door shut, leaving it open just a tiny crack, so she could monitor the situation and hear everything clearly. The pounding resumed louder, and far more frantic this time. I walked over to the door and looked through the small glass peephole. My stomach twisted into a tight, cold knot. Standing in the hallway, completely ignoring basic decency, were my mother, my father, and Connor. Connor was aggressively slamming his fist against the wood, his face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. My father stood behind him, his jaw clenched tightly, while my mother nervously clutched her expensive designer handbag, looking around the hallway, as if afraid someone might witness their completely unhinged behavior. I took a deep, steadying breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened the door a few inches. Before I could even say a word, Connor violently shoved the door forward. The force of his push sent me stumbling backward into the narrow entryway. My own brother had just physically forced his way into my home. My father marched in right behind him, stepping over my welcome mat with heavy, authoritative strides. My mother followed quickly, pulling the door shut behind her and locking it securely. They stood in my living room, invading my safe space, bringing the absolute toxicity of their suburban fortress directly into my sanctuary. They looked at my modest apartment with open disdain. "What is wrong with you?" I demanded, finding my balance and crossing my arms tightly over my chest. "You cannot just break into my apartment like a group of criminals." Connor did not even acknowledge my boundary. He reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out a folded piece of heavy stock paper, and slammed it down onto my kitchen island. He pointed a trembling manic finger directly at my face. "Bradley officially put a hold on my contract this morning." Connor screamed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings of my living room. "He called me personally. He said you have been ignoring the internal legal department for 2 entire days. He said you locked them out of the server and you are aggressively holding company property hostage. My entire $5 million deal is entirely frozen because you want to throw a pathetic selfish temper tantrum. I looked down at the paper he had slammed onto the counter. It was a pre-written typed document. The header clearly stated it was a formal letter of apology addressed directly to Bradley and the Vanguard Pay Executive Board. Sign it. Connor ordered, his eyes wide and unhinged. Read it and sign it right now. I picked up the paper and scanned the paragraphs. It was the most deeply humiliating, degrading document I had ever seen. The letter explicitly stated that I was experiencing a severe mental health crisis during my performance review. It stated that I acted irrationally, maliciously, and entirely without provocation. It included a formal, legally binding admission of guilt regarding data tampering and sabotage. Finally, it concluded with an unconditional surrender of all administrative passwords and a desperate plea to be reinstated at a lower salary tier as an act of corporate mercy. It was an absolute surrender of my dignity, my legal rights, and my entire professional future. Did Bradley write this absolute garbage? I asked, looking up at my brother with complete disgust. Or did you write it together while crying over your fragile logistics deal? My father stepped forward, his physical presence designed to intimidate me into submission. Do not speak to your brother that way, Nora. He commanded, his voice booming with forced authority. We read that letter. It is a perfectly reasonable compromise to fix the massive disaster you created. You insulted a very powerful man. You embarrassed our family name in the corporate sector. You are going to sign that document today, and you are going to hand-deliver it to Bradley tomorrow morning. I dropped the letter back onto the marble counter as if it were infected. I am not signing a fake confession to save a fragile business deal, I said, my voice dropping into a cold, dangerous register. And I am absolutely not giving Bradley my administrative passwords. He does not own my work. My mother let out a loud, dramatic sob, pressing her heavily jeweled hand against her chest. I cannot believe I raised such a selfish, ungrateful daughter, she wailed, her voice shrill and piercing. We gave you absolutely everything, Nora. We paid for your entire college education. We gave you a beautiful life. And this is how you repay our kindness. You are purposefully trying to bankrupt your own brother out of pure spite. You are jealous of his immense success, so you are trying to destroy his life. Jealous, I repeated, staring at her in absolute disbelief. He cannot even close a standard deal without using me as human collateral. Sign the paper, Nora, Connor roared, slamming his hand on the counter again, making my coffee mug rattle. You are not a genius. You are just a glorified IT support girl who got incredibly lucky. You are going to sign this paper, and you are going to go back to your desk and do exactly what you are told. If you do not fix this, I am going to lose my partnership. I stood perfectly still, watching the three of them completely unravel. They were so blinded by their own greed and their desperate need to maintain their social status that they could not see the reality of the situation. They only saw me as a tool to be used and discarded. My father took another step closer, closing the distance between us until he was towering over me. His eyes were cold and completely devoid of any paternal affection. Let me make this incredibly clear for you, Nora, he said slowly, emphasizing every single syllable. You will sign this letter right now. If you refuse, I will personally call the board of directors at the regional bank. I will use every single connection I have in the financial sector to ensure your credit lines are frozen and your professional reputation is permanently destroyed. We will publicly disown you. We will tell everyone in our social circle that you suffered a severe psychological breakdown and had to be institutionalized. You will be completely cut off financially, socially, and entirely removed from this family. You will have absolutely nothing and nobody. Sign the paper. The threat hung heavy in the air, completely suffocating and violently cruel. They were willing to actively destroy my life permanently, ruin my financial future, and declare me legally insane just to appease a toxic CEO. They looked at me, waiting for the inevitable tears, waiting for my resolve to shatter completely under the heavy weight of their ultimate ultimatum. They fully expected me to reach for the pen. I did not reach for the pen. I did not blink, and I absolutely did not cry. For 28 years, my entire existence within this family had been defined by my ability to absorb their abuse and translate it into quiet compliance. Whenever Connor failed a class, I was the one who tutored him late into the night. Whenever he wrecked a car, my parents quietly used my college savings to cover the damages to protect his flawless reputation. They had meticulously conditioned me to believe that my only true value was acting as the invisible shock absorber for his relentless incompetence. But as I stared at the three of them standing aggressively in my living room, trying to terrorize me into surrendering a $500 million asset, I felt nothing but a profound, icy clarity. I reached past the black ballpoint pen resting on the marble counter. Instead, I picked up the heavy stock paper containing the humiliating apology letter. Connor smirked slightly, crossing his arms, assuming I was finally reading it over one last time before signing my life away. My mother let out a loud, exaggerated sigh of relief, adjusting her designer handbag and relaxing her posture. I held the document with both hands, locked my eyes directly onto my father's angry face, and pulled my hands violently apart. The thick cardstock ripped with a sharp, incredibly satisfying tear that echoed loudly through the silent apartment. The smirk instantly vanished from Connor's face. My mother gasped, taking a sudden, terrified step backward as if I had just fired a gun. I placed the two torn halves together and ripped them again straight down the middle. I kept folding and tearing the paper, maintaining unbroken eye contact with my father, until the pathetic apology was nothing more than a handful of jagged white confetti. I opened my hand and let the pieces flutter down onto the hardwood floor, landing directly on his expensive leather shoes. "What are you doing?" my father demanded, his voice dropping the commanding facade and cracking with genuine shock. "Have you completely lost your mind?" "I have never been more rational in my entire life," I replied, my voice perfectly level, projecting absolute authority. "You threatened to disown me. You threatened to ruin my credit and tell your wealthy suburban friends that I am insane. You think those empty threats terrify me. You think I care about being invited to your country club dinners or maintaining my status in a family that views me as nothing more than an expendable asset. You are entirely delusional." "Nora, stop this right now," my mother shrieked, stepping forward and pointing a trembling, manicured finger at my face. "You are destroying this family over pure selfishness." "There is no family to destroy," I shot back, refusing to break eye contact or soften my tone. "There is only a parasitic host and the people willing to bleed themselves dry to feed it." I turned my attention squarely to my brother. Connor shrank back slightly, his false bravado rapidly crumbling under the heavy weight of my direct, unapologetic gaze. "You have never earned a single thing in your entire life, Connor. Bradley is not freezing your contract because of my supposed temper tantrum. He is freezing it because you are completely useless to him, unless you can control me. Your only real talent is acting like a parasite. I will never set myself on fire to keep your mediocrity warm again." "You ungrateful little brat!" Connor shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. He stepped forward quickly, raising his hand in the air as if he were going to physically strike me right across the face. Before he could even complete the aggressive motion, I stepped directly into his personal space, closing the distance until we were mere inches apart. "Do it," I dared him, my voice dropping to a lethal, quiet whisper. "Lay one hand on me in my own home. I will have you arrested for felony assault and trespassing before you even make it to the lobby elevator. You will not just lose your precious logistics contract. You will lose your freedom entirely." Connor froze his hand, hovering awkwardly in the air. The absolute certainty burning in my eyes completely paralyzed him. He realized in that exact second that the compliant, silent sister he had bullied for 2 decades was completely gone. In her place was a woman who held total leverage and possessed zero hesitation to destroy him. My father tried to desperately salvage the situation, puffing out his chest and attempting to project dominance one last time. "You are making the biggest mistake of your life, Nora," He warned, his face tight with furious rage. If you do not pick up those pieces right now and beg for our forgiveness, we are walking out that door. And if we walk out, we are never coming back. You will be entirely dead to us. I smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile that perfectly mirrored the exact energy Naomi had taught me over the past 3 days. That is the single best offer you have ever given me, I said, my voice dripping with absolute venom. Get out! They stood completely frozen, staring at me as if I had suddenly spoken a foreign language. The complete absence of fear in my demeanor broke their entire psychological framework. I pointed a firm hand directly at my front door. I said, "Get out of my apartment immediately. You have exactly 10 seconds to leave before I call the building security and have you forcibly removed. And trust me, I will press formal charges against all 3 of you." My mother began to cry genuinely, this time her tears ruining her expensive makeup as the reality of the severance washed over her. She looked at my father, expecting him to magically fix the situation and force me back into my designated subordinate role. But my father simply stared at me, realizing for the very first time in his life that he had absolutely zero power over my decisions. He turned on his heel, marching toward the heavy wooden door without saying a single word. My mother followed quickly behind him, sobbing loudly into her trembling hands. Connor lingered for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting frantically between the shredded paper on the floor and my uncompromising expression. "You are going to regret this," he muttered, his voice shaking with a pathetic mixture of fear and rage. "Bradley is going to crush you." "Tell Bradley," I said, my voice ringing with total finality, "that he does not own my algorithm. Tell him I own every single line of code, and tell him I am coming for absolutely everything." Connor went completely pale. He finally understood the sheer magnitude of the legal trap Bradley had blindly walked into. He backed away, stumbling slightly over the metal threshold, and practically ran down the long carpeted hallway to catch up with our parents. I stepped forward, grabbed the heavy brass handle, and slammed the door shut with tremendous force. The loud sound echoed through the hallway, serving as a definitive punctuation mark on 28 years of exhausting emotional manipulation. I threw the heavy metal deadbolt, locking them out of my life permanently. I leaned my forehead against the cool, painted wood, taking a deep, cleansing breath. The heavy, suffocating weight that had rested on my chest since childhood instantly vanished into thin air. I was completely unburdened. The door to the guest bedroom clicked open softly. Naomi stepped out into the narrow hallway, her leather briefcase firmly in hand. She walked over to the kitchen island, looked down at the shredded apology letter covering the floor, and then looked directly into my eyes. A massive, triumphant smile spread across her sharp features. "That was the most brilliant, beautiful execution of a personal boundary I have ever witnessed," Naomi said, her voice filled with genuine, deep respect. I turned to face my brilliant attorney, my only true ally in this entire corporate war. The familial dead weight had been entirely severed. There were no more emotional vulnerabilities or family ties for Bradley to exploit. The battlefield was entirely clear. "We gave them enough time to panic," I said, walking back toward the kitchen counter and picking up my phone. "Now we strike." Naomi nodded, pulling her sleek laptop from her bag. "Let us show Apex Global exactly what they are trying to buy." The narrative shifts across the city to the penthouse level of the Vanguard Pay corporate headquarters. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive suite offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, but Bradley was not enjoying the scenery. He was pacing furiously behind his massive mahogany desk, his custom-tailored suit jacket discarded over the back of an expensive leather chair. The pressure of the impending Apex Global acquisition was creating a suffocating atmosphere throughout the entire floor. Cameron walked into the office carrying 2 heavy crystal glasses and a bottle of top-tier scotch. He looked entirely too relaxed for a man whose entire financial future was currently hanging by a thread. Cameron poured the amber liquid, sliding one glass across the polished wood toward his boss. "Relax," Bradley Cameron said, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Connor just texted me from the lobby of her building. He went in with her parents. They brought the apology letter we drafted. You know how her family operates. They will absolutely verbally destroy her until she signs it. She is probably crying on her kitchen floor right now, begging them not to cut off her credit cards. Bradley stopped pacing and picked up the glass, downing the scotch in one aggressive swallow. She should have signed the retroactive intellectual property transfer on Tuesday. He snapped, his voice tight with lingering anxiety. The Apex Global Final Audit team arrives in exactly 48 hours. If they ask to see the original chain of title for the integration algorithm, and I do not have her signature on a company release form, the entire $500 million deal vanishes. She will sign it, Cameron reassured him, waving a dismissive hand. She is terrified. She completely ghosted our internal legal department for 3 days. That is classic panic behavior. She is hiding because she knows we caught her trying to sabotage the servers. Bradley let out a heavy breath, running a hand through his expensive haircut. His eyes drifted downward, landing on a thick white envelope resting perfectly centered on his desk blotter. It was the exact envelope I had handed to him on Tuesday morning, right before I walked out of his office. Amidst the chaos of the smear campaign, the emergency meetings with Apex, and the frantic calls to my brother Bradley, had completely forgotten to open it. He reached across his desk and picked it up. He weighed the heavy paper in his hand, a smug, arrogant smile slowly returning to his face. I completely forgot about this, Bradley chuckled, tapping the corner of the envelope against the desk. This is the letter she handed me when she dramatically quit. I guarantee it is a massive, rambling, emotional apology. She probably listed every single grievance she has had since her first day, and then begged for a promotion. Read it out loud. Cameron laughed, leaning back against the leather sofa and resting his expensive shoes on the glass coffee table. I want to hear the exact moment she realizes she is completely expendable. Bradley picked up a silver letter opener and sliced cleanly through the heavy wax seal. He pulled out 3 pages of crisp premium cardstock. His arrogant smile remained fixed on his face as he unfolded the documents, but as his eyes scanned the bold black text at the top of the first page, the smile instantly vanished. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a custom suit. "What is it?" Cameron asked, dropping his feet to the floor, his mocking tone faltering. "Did she ask for severance pay?" Bradley did not answer. He was staring at the paper with wide, horrified eyes, his breathing suddenly shallow and rapid. "This is not a resignation letter," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "This is a formal legal injunction." Cameron stood up quickly, placing his glass on the desk and stepping behind Bradley to read over his shoulder. The document was meticulously formatted, bearing the official seal of a registered corporate entity. It was not written by an emotional employee. It was drafted by a highly aggressive intellectual property attorney. "It is a legally binding cease and desist order," Bradley read aloud, his voice growing louder and more frantic with every single word. "Notice of license termination. Effective immediately, Vanguard Pay is ordered to halt all commercial usage of the proprietary client integration algorithm currently functioning as the core transaction engine." Cameron scoffed, crossing his arms aggressively. "She cannot terminate a license we never signed. We own that algorithm. She built it here." "Look at the registered owner," Cameron Bradley shouted, slamming the paper down onto the desk. "Look at the name on the copyright." Cameron leaned in closer. The document clearly stated that the entire source code, backend architecture, and operational framework were the exclusive legal property of my newly formed limited liability company. The legal claim was absolute, airtight, and backed by emergency federal copyright filings. "She gave us exactly 24 hours to comply," Bradley said, his hands shaking as he picked up the second page. "It says if we do not physically disconnect the algorithm from our main servers by tomorrow morning, she will initiate a remote digital lockdown to protect her stolen assets. She is threatening to completely shut down the entire company." For 10 agonizing seconds, the executive office was completely silent. The sheer magnitude of the threat hung in the air, wrapping around their throats like a physical wire. If Vanguard Pay went dark for even 1 hour, the financial markets would panic. If Apex Global discovered they were buying a company entirely dependent on stolen software, the fraud charges would send both of them to federal prison. Then Cameron started to laugh, It was a loud, obnoxious barking laugh that echoed sharply against the glass windows. "Are you seriously panicking over this?" Cameron asked, pointing a mocking finger at the heavy cardstock. "Look at the formatting, Bradley." She went online and downloaded a free legal template. She formed a fake company on a cheap website and printed this out at a copy shop to try and scare us. "Do you honestly believe the girl who wears cheap sweaters and brings her lunch in a plastic container has a ruthless corporate lawyer on retainer?" Bradley stared at the paper, his panic slowly morphing back into familiar toxic arrogance. "You are right," he said, his breathing steadying. "This is a desperate bluff. She knows she has absolutely no real leverage, so she printed fake legal documents. She is trying to extort us before the Apex deal closes." "Exactly." Cameron smiled, walking back to the sofa and picking up his scotch. "She does not have the money to fight us in court, and she definitely does not have the technical skills to lock us out of our own servers. She is just a glorified IT girl throwing a tantrum. Ignore the letter." Bradley nodded, his confidence fully restored by his own massive ego. He picked up his desk phone and immediately dialed the direct extension for the head of the Vanguard Information Technology Department. Marcus Bradley barked into the receiver the second the line connected. "I need you to completely wipe Nora from the internal network right now. Do not just suspend her account. I want you to actively bypass her master administrative credentials and lock her out of the integration algorithm permanently." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Sir Marcus replied, his voice hesitant. "She built the back-end security architecture from scratch. Bypassing her master encryption requires a direct manual override from her personal workstation." "I do not care what it requires," Bradley yelled, his face turning red with sudden fury. "Hack the password, break the firewall. Do whatever you have to do to secure that code by the end of the day. If you cannot get past her basic security protocols, I will fire your entire department and replace you with people who can." Bradley slammed the phone down onto the receiver, terminating the call. He picked up the cease and desist order and violently crumpled it into a tight ball, tossing it directly into the metal trash can next to his desk. "Problem solved," Bradley said, straightening his tie and glaring at the city skyline. "Let her try to lock us out. We hold all the cards." The two men raised their glasses in a silent, arrogant toast, entirely unaware that the 24-hour countdown had officially begun and their entire corporate empire was already bleeding out. The countdown hit zero precisely at 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning. The bustling trading floor of Vanguard Pay was operating at peak capacity, processing millions of dollars in rapid microtransactions. Bradley was standing at the head of the glass-walled conference room, pointing at a projection of the third quarter earnings. Cameron was seated next to him, aggressively texting on his phone. Everything was functioning exactly as it always had, until the digital heartbeat of the entire company flatlined. It did not happen slowly. There was no warning lag or buffering icon. In a single simultaneous catastrophic moment, every single monitor on the executive floor flickered and instantly turned a violently bright shade of crimson. A massive error code flashed across the projection screen in the conference room, bathing Bradley's face in a harsh red glow. The low hum of keyboard clicking abruptly stopped, replaced by a wave of confused gasps from the trading floor. The client integration system, the absolute core engine of Vanguard Pay, went completely dark. The catastrophic failure cascaded through the network in milliseconds. Real-time transaction numbers froze on the screens before plummeting straight to zero. Millions of dollars in pending client transfers were immediately trapped in digital limbo. Traders scrambled frantically, slamming their phones and violently rebooting their desktop computers. It was entirely useless. The entire proprietary software was heavily encrypted and entirely locked down, both legally and technically. My kill switch had executed flawlessly, demanding a proprietary decryption key that only I possessed. Within 30 seconds, the external phone lines began to ring. It started as a few isolated chirps but rapidly escalated into a deafening, synchronized scream as furious corporate clients realized their massive capital transfers were blocked. Cameron dropped his phone onto the desk, his arrogant facade instantly shattering. We have a meeting with the Apex Global Final Audit team in less than 2 days. Cameron stammered, his voice pitching upward in pure panic. If they see this, we are completely dead. The heavy glass door to the conference room burst open. Marcus, the head of the Information Technology Department, sprinted into the room. He was no longer wearing his usual calm demeanor. He looked absolutely terrified, his face pale and drenched in nervous sweat. He ignored Cameron and ran directly to Bradley, clutching a diagnostic tablet to his chest. The entire network is gone, Marcus gasped, fighting to catch his breath. The integration algorithm severed itself from the main servers. I told you to bypass her security yesterday, Bradley roared, throwing his presentation pointer violently against the wall. Break the firewall right now and get us back online. We cannot break it, Marcus yelled back, his own panic overriding his fear of Bradley's temper. She did not just change a password. She legally weaponized the architecture. She triggered an external federal copyright block, wired directly to a registered private company. If my team attempts a forced entry to bypass the master encryption, we will trigger a massive alarm with the Federal Cyber Division. The system recognizes Vanguard Pay as an unauthorized hostile entity. It is not an internal corporate issue anymore, Bradley. Bypassing that firewall is a felony cybercrime. If we attempt a brute force entry, we are actively committing federal copyright infringement, and the system will automatically purge the entire database to protect the asset. Before Bradley could even process the horrifying reality of facing federal prison, Cameron's cell phone began to vibrate violently against the glass table. Then his desk phone rang. Then his direct emergency line chirped. Within seconds, every single communication line routed to the vice president of sales was flashing a brilliant, blinding red. The internal blackout had officially breached the external markets. Cameron picked up his cell phone, his hand trembling so badly he almost dropped the expensive device onto the floor. He swiped the screen, accepting a rapid priority call from the chief financial officer of their absolute largest national retail client. Before Cameron could even utter his standard slick morning greeting, the executive on the other end began screaming so loudly the audio severely distorted through the tiny earpiece. The client aggressively demanded to know why $50 million in scheduled routing funds had suddenly vanished into thin digital air. Cameron stuttered helplessly, his perfectly practiced, confident sales pitch completely evaporating under the intense, unyielding pressure. He tried to utilize his standard corporate buzzwords rapidly, mentioning a routine scheduled server upgrade and a temporary synchronization latency, but the seasoned executive immediately cut him off. The client did not want empty golf course banter or polished excuses. They demanded immediate technical explanations and ironclad guaranteed timelines for full system restoration. Cameron looked wildly around the chaotic room, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He had absolutely no idea how the software actually functioned. For 4 entire years, he had relied entirely on me to write his technical briefing packets, explain the complex network architecture, and personally fix every single minor client glitch. Without me standing right next to him, feeding him the technical answers through an invisible wire, he was completely exposed as an absolute intellectual fraud. The carefully crafted facade of the untouchable top corporate performer instantly crumbled in front of the entire terrified executive management team. Bradley lunged furiously across the expensive glass conference table, violently grabbing Cameron by the lapels of his custom-tailored suit jacket. "Fix this!" Bradley screamed at the top of his lungs, his spit flying directly onto Cameron's pale face. "You are the senior vice president of sales. Do your job. Placate them right now and save these massive accounts before they walk away." I do not know how Cameron choked out, his voice cracking in pure, unadulterated terror. I do not know what the red error code means, Bradley. Nora always handled the complex technical routing. She built the entire backend. I cannot answer any of their technical questions. The speakerphone resting on the center of the desk suddenly clicked active, projecting a different furious client directly into the chaotic room. It was the ruthless head of a massive international hedge fund. "Listen to me very carefully, Vanguard." The client barked, his icy voice echoing off the glass walls. "I do not care about your internal technical issues. You are currently holding $20 million of our active capital hostage. If that transaction system is not fully restored and operational by the exact end of the business day today, we are pulling every single cent. We will completely liquidate our accounts, and we will personally ensure the Federal Trade Commission immediately audits Vanguard Pay for extreme gross negligence. The line went dead with a sharp click, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its massive wake. The end of the business day was exactly 7 hours away, and Vanguard Pay was completely paralyzed. As the massive hedge fund severed the connection, the primary external monitoring system at Apex Global headquarters automatically tripped. Apex did not become the largest tech conglomerate in the Western Hemisphere by ignoring financial warning signs. When an entire custom integration framework suddenly flatlined during the incredibly delicate final due diligence phase of a $500 million acquisition, the automated internal red flags were absolutely instantaneous. Within 15 minutes of the initial server blackout, the lead acquisitions director at Apex Global sent a highly encrypted priority email directly to Bradley's trembling inbox. The message was brutally concise, leaving zero room for interpretation. The $500 million acquisition of Vanguard Pay was officially and immediately suspended, pending a massive emergency forensic audit of all corporate intellectual property claims. Apex demanded absolute verifiable legal proof that Vanguard owned the core algorithm architecture. If Bradley could not produce a completely clean chain of title by tomorrow morning, Apex would not only publicly abandon the entire deal, but they would aggressively refer Vanguard to the federal trade authorities for actively attempting to sell fraudulent and stolen digital assets. Bradley stared intensely at the bright computer screen, his chest heaving with pure, unadulterated fury. The impenetrable walls of his corporate empire were rapidly collapsing inward, actively crushing him under the immense weight of his own profound arrogance. He desperately needed a target to absorb his panic. He snatched his desk phone and aggressively punched in a familiar set of digits. On the other side of the city, Connor answered on the very first ring, his voice dripping with pathetic, desperate anticipation. He fully expected news that his massive logistics deal was finally signed. Instead, he was immediately met with a violent wall of pure, screaming rage. Bradley did not bother to greet him. He unleashed a vicious, relentless verbal assault, explicitly blaming Connor for his absolute failure to emotionally control his sister. He screamed that my calculated refusal to submit had just destroyed a $500 million corporate buyout. Then Bradley delivered the ultimate fatal blow. He formally and permanently terminated the massive Vanguard logistics contract with Connor's firm. He viciously vowed to personally ensure that no major financial institution in the entire city would ever hire Connor's firm again. He promised to actively blacklist my brother in the exact same ruthless manner they had confidently tried to blacklist me. Bradley violently slammed the phone down, practically shattering the heavy plastic receiver against the mahogany desk. In his upscale downtown office, Connor stood completely frozen, the dead dial tone echoing loudly in his ear. The color drained entirely from his arrogant face as the horrifying reality finally set in. His incredibly fragile logistics contract was dead. His highly coveted corporate partnership promotion evaporated instantly into thin air. He had spent his entire life lazily coasting on my silent support, aggressively bullying me into quiet submission to cover his own glaring incompetence. Now, by actively participating in the vicious coordinated attempt to destroy my professional life, he had entirely detonated his own career. His reputation in the competitive logistics sector was permanently ruined beyond repair. The brutal karma he had so desperately avoided his entire life had finally arrived to collect its massive, undeniable debt. I sat completely still at my kitchen island, staring at the pristine, glowing screen of my custom-built desktop computer. The digital clock in the corner of my monitor read exactly 9:15 in the morning. The silence in my apartment was absolute, but the device resting face up on the marble counter was vibrating violently. It had not stopped shaking for the past 20 minutes. I reached over and picked up my cell phone. The screen was an absolute chaotic wall of frantic notifications. I had exactly 45 missed calls. The vast majority of them were from my parents and my brother Connor. I tapped the voicemail icon and listened to the sheer panic unfolding in real time. The first few messages from Connor were filled with his typical arrogant rage, aggressively demanding I fix the server issue immediately so his logistics deal could proceed. But as the minutes ticked by and the brutal reality of his permanent cancellation set in, his tone completely shattered. By the eighth voicemail, he was openly sobbing into the receiver. He begged me to call Bradley and take everything back. He frantically promised to give me the $5,000 he had mockingly offered earlier if I would just reset the system. He pleaded with me to save his career and reverse his termination. My parents were absolutely no better. The people who had stood in my living room less than 24 hours ago viciously threatening to publicly disown me and destroy my credit were now leaving pathetic weeping messages. My mother cried hysterically, begging me to consider the family legacy. She sobbed that I needed to fix this massive corporate disaster to save the family honor. My father left a long, breathless message pleading for mercy, asking me to be the bigger person and restore the Vanguard system before their wealthy country club friends found out about Connor's massive public failure. They had entirely abandoned their aggressive threats the absolute second their precious social standing was genuinely threatened. I listened to their desperate tears, feeling absolutely nothing. I did not feel pity. I did not feel guilt. The emotional manipulation that had controlled my entire life was completely powerless against me now. As the final voicemail ended, the phone immediately lit up again with an incoming call. The caller identification displayed the main executive line for Vanguard Pay. I let it ring 3 times before calmly swiping the screen and raising the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I simply waited in total silence. "Nora, please do not hang up." The voice on the other end pleaded instantly. It was Sarah, the head of human resources. Her usually polished, perfectly rehearsed corporate voice was trembling uncontrollably. She sounded like she was physically hiding under her desk to make this call. "We are in a state of absolute total emergency over here. The entire client integration network is locked down, and Bradley is having a literal meltdown in the conference room. Apex Global just formally suspended the acquisition, and clients are threatening to pull hundreds of millions of dollars by the end of the day. I am no longer a Vanguard employee, Sarah." I stated, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotion. I submitted my resignation and I formally relinquished my access card. My employment contract is entirely void. "No, your contract is not void." Sarah rushed to correct me, her words stumbling over one another in her absolute panic. "Bradley officially rejected your resignation. You are still actively listed in our internal system as a highly valued senior employee. Please, Nora, we desperately need you to come back into the office right now. We need you to use your master access key to unlock the integration algorithm immediately before the company goes completely bankrupt. Vanguard is currently in direct violation of a federal cease and desist order," I reminded her, keeping my tone icy and entirely professional. "If you attempt to bypass my security architecture, you will trigger a massive federal cybercrime alert." "We know," Sarah cried, her voice pitching upward into a desperate squeak. "We know you own the copyright. The legal team verified your emergency filings an hour ago." Bradley finally admitted everything to the board. "Listen to me, Nora. The executive board just held an emergency vote. They are officially offering to immediately triple your base salary. They will give you a massive cash signing bonus today and full retroactive back pay for your entire 9-year tenure. They are even willing to instantly terminate Cameron and give you his title as the Senior Vice President of Sales. You can have his massive corner office. You can have absolutely anything you want. We will rewrite your entire contract right now. Just please tell me the master decryption password." I let the sheer desperation of her offer hang in the heavy air for a long moment. A week ago, an offer like that would have completely changed my life. I would have thanked them profusely and rushed back to my desk to save their crumbling empire. They genuinely believed that massive amounts of money could still buy my absolute compliance. They arrogantly thought a fancy title and a corner office would instantly erase nearly a decade of toxic abuse, manipulation, and calculated theft. I closed my eyes, taking a slow, deep breath, savoring the absolute ultimate victory. Sarah, I replied, my voice dropping into a chilling register of pure calculated professionalism. When Bradley handed me that fake performance review, he told me I had a terribly bad attitude. He explicitly stated that I was uncooperative and highly detrimental to the corporate environment. Nora, please. That was a massive mistake, Sarah begged, openly weeping into the phone now. He was just trying to control the budget. You were absolutely right, Sarah. I continued, completely ignoring her pathetic tears. I really do have a bad attitude when greedy, incompetent men try to steal my personal intellectual property and quietly sell it for $500 million. I do not want Cameron's job. I do not want Bradley's money. I do not want any part of your fragile, toxic company. Please, Nora. Sarah whispered, her voice breaking completely. See you in court, I said, delivering the final blow with absolute precision. I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the bright red button, ending the call instantly. I opened my contacts list and systematically navigated to my family group. I tapped on my mother's profile and hit block. I tapped on my father's profile and hit block. I tapped on Connor's profile and hit block, permanently severing their access to my life. I placed the phone completely face down on the cool marble counter and turned my attention back to the glowing computer monitor. The Vanguard network was completely dark, but my digital trap had worked flawlessly. Bradley and Cameron had absolutely no choice. They abandoned their chaotic, dark trading floor and rode in complete silence to the financial district. The Apex Global building was a massive, towering obelisk of dark glass and black steel that completely dominated the downtown skyline. It was a physical manifestation of absolute corporate dominance. Bradley stepped out of the luxury town car, his expensive Italian leather shoes hitting the wet pavement. Despite the cool Chicago wind, he was visibly sweating. A massive dark stain was already forming under the arms of his custom-tailored suit jacket. Cameron looked even worse, his face a sickly shade of gray as he nervously adjusted his silk tie for the 10th time. Pull yourself together, Cameron, Bradley hissed, grabbing his vice president by the arm and dragging him toward the towering glass revolving doors. We are walking into the biggest boardroom in the city. You need to look like a man who is entirely in control of his assets, not a terrified intern. They are going to cancel the acquisition. Bradley. Cameron whispered, his voice trembling. They know the chain of title is fake. They know she locked us out. We are completely ruined. They are not canceling anything. Bradley snapped, his jaw clenched tight with desperate, toxic arrogance. Apex Global wants this integration algorithm. They have already invested millions of dollars in the preliminary due diligence phase. They are not going to throw a $500 million deal away just because of a minor internal personnel dispute. I know how men like the Apex chief executive operate. They respect raw power and aggressive problem-solving. We go up there and we confidently assure them that this is a temporary nuisance. And what exactly do we say about Nora? Cameron asked, stumbling slightly as they entered the massive marble lobby. We tell them the absolute truth. Bradley lied smoothly, stepping into the private executive elevator. We tell them she is a severely disgruntled former employee, experiencing a massive psychological breakdown. We tell them she illegally hacked our secure servers as a pathetic revenge tactic because she was passed over for a routine promotion. We assure Apex that our elite internal legal team is already handling the situation. I will personally promise them that I will aggressively wring the algorithm out of her by the end of the business day. Once we crush her, Apex gets their clean title and we get our massive payout. Cameron nodded frantically, desperately wanting to believe the arrogant fiction his boss was spinning. The elevator shot upward at a terrifying speed, making their stomachs drop. It opened smoothly onto the 80th floor. The Apex executive suite was incredibly stark. There were no decorative plants or expensive modern art pieces. It was a cold, brutal environment designed purely for ruthless efficiency. A silent assistant led them down a long, dark corridor toward the primary boardroom. Bradley adjusted his jacket, pushing his shoulders back and pasting on his signature aggressive corporate smile. He walked into the massive glass-walled room as if he owned the entire building. The chief executive officer of Apex Global was seated at the far end of a 30-foot black marble table. He was an older man with piercing gray eyes and a demeanor that radiated absolute uncompromising authority. He did not stand to greet them. He did not offer them a seat. He simply stared at Bradley with the cold, detached curiosity of a predator observing a profoundly stupid animal. Mr. Sterling Bradley began, his voice projecting artificial confidence as he approached the table. "I deeply apologize for the temporary disruption in our network services this morning. We experienced a minor malicious breach from a disgruntled former employee. She was recently terminated for severe corporate misconduct, and she threw a pathetic tantrum on her way out the door. It is completely under control." Mr. Sterling remained perfectly motionless. His gray eyes flicked toward a thick manila folder resting on the polished black marble in front of him. "A minor malicious breach," he repeated, his voice deep and entirely devoid of warmth. "You are claiming this catastrophic system failure is the result of a simple, disgruntled employee?" "Absolutely." Bradley nodded, his smile widening. "She is a low-level support technician who managed to momentarily scramble our external routing protocols. She claims she owns the core algorithm, but her legal filings are completely fraudulent. My legal team is already drafting the federal extortion charges. I personally promise you, Mr. Sterling, that I will wring every single line of code out of her before the sun goes down today. We will secure your asset and finalize this acquisition exactly as planned." The Apex chief executive slowly opened the manila folder. He pulled out a crisp, heavy piece of cardstock. It was the exact same federal copyright certificate Naomi had filed on my behalf. Apex had not just flagged the system failure. Their massive elite legal division had immediately pulled the federal registry documents. "You are an incredibly foolish man, Bradley," Mr. Sterling said, his voice cutting through the silent room like a razor blade. "You walked into my building and lied directly to my face. This is not a fraudulent document. This is a highly fortified, ironclad federal copyright. Vanguard Pay does not own the integration algorithm. You never owned it. You attempted to sell me $500 million worth of stolen intellectual property." Bradley felt the artificial confidence instantly drain from his body. His stomach twisted violently. "Sir, I assure you that copyright was filed illegally," he stammered desperately, trying to salvage his crumbling lie. "She stole the code from our secure servers. I will force her to sign the intellectual property transfer today. I will handle her." "You will not handle anything," Mr. Sterling interrupted, his tone dripping with absolute disdain. "Apex Global does not do business with incompetent thieves who cannot even secure their own back-end architecture. We certainly do not rely on desperate men who use extortion to cover their massive professional failures." Cameron let out a pathetic whimpering sound, taking a slow step backward toward the heavy glass doors. He knew the deal was completely dead, but Mr. Sterling Bradley pleaded, dropping all pretense of authority and resorting to pure begging. "The algorithm is the most valuable asset on the entire market. You need that software to complete your global network integration. You cannot just abandon the deal." "Oh, I am not abandoning the software," Mr. Sterling replied, a cold, dangerous smile finally appearing on his weathered face. "Apex Global fully intends to acquire the complete legal rights to the integration algorithm today, but we will not be paying Vanguard Pay a single cent." Bradley stared at the powerful man in pure, absolute confusion. "If you are not buying it from us, how exactly do you plan to acquire it?" Mr. Sterling closed the manila folder and leaned back in his leather chair. "Because, Bradley, I do not need you to wring the code out of a disgruntled employee. The absolute brilliant creator and sole legal owner of the algorithm is already sitting right here in my boardroom." The heavy oak paneling on the far side of the massive room suddenly slid open with a soft mechanical hum. Bradley and Cameron snapped their heads toward the sound, their eyes widening in absolute, unadulterated horror. They completely froze, instantly paralyzed by the impossible reality walking out of the shadows. Walking perfectly in step beside me was Naomi. She looked like a highly lethal corporate weapon, wearing a sleek black blazer and carrying a massive dark leather briefcase. The physical reaction from the Vanguard executives was absolute and immediate. Cameron let out a choked, desperate gasp, physically recoiling backward until his spine violently collided with the thick glass wall of the boardroom. He looked as though he had just seen a literal ghost rising directly from the floorboards. Bradley simply stood there, his mouth hanging completely open, his eyes bulging in pure, unadulterated shock. The massive veins in his neck pulsed wildly against his expensive silk collar as his brain desperately tried to process the catastrophic power shift occurring right in front of him. "What the hell is she doing here?" Bradley finally managed to scream, his voice cracking severely under the intense, overwhelming pressure. "Mr. Sterling, this is the severely unhinged employee I just told you about. She has absolutely no authorization to be in this building. Nora, I am ordering you to leave this boardroom immediately and return to your desk." I did not flinch. I did not avert my gaze. I walked directly to the massive black marble table and took a seat, deliberately placing myself directly across from the Apex chief executive. Naomi stood tall right beside my chair. She calmly unlatched her heavy leather briefcase and pulled out a towering stack of heavily tabbed legal documents. She dropped the massive stack onto the polished marble with a loud, definitive thud that echoed sharply off the cold glass walls. "You are in absolutely no position to issue orders, Bradley," Naomi stated, her voice ringing with chilling, uncompromising legal authority. "My client is Nora, the sole legal architect and undisputed owner of the core integration algorithm. You are currently looking at the original certified federal copyright filings, the raw encrypted timestamps of the primary code deployment, and the explicit independent contractor loophole actively buried deep within your own terribly drafted boilerplate employment agreement." Naomi leaned forward, sliding the primary contract directly across the table toward the trembling chief executive of Vanguard Pay. "You utilized a standard generic template downloaded from a discount legal service for her original hiring packet. You actively refused to update her contract when you forced her to build the massive back-end infrastructure because you simply did not want to trigger a mandatory salary review. That staggering display of cheap, toxic corporate greed officially classified her revolutionary work as an independent, unattached digital asset. You never paid her a development bonus. You never filed a provisional patent. You never required her to sign a comprehensive non-compete clause governing independent structural inventions." Bradley lunged forward, his face turning a dangerous, violent shade of crimson. "That is entirely a lie," he spat furiously, pounding his closed fist onto the table. "Vanguard Pay owns everything she created on our time. We own her. We will tie her up in aggressive corporate litigation until she is entirely bankrupt. We will drag her through the federal courts for the next 20 solid years. You will not be dragging anyone into court." Mr. Sterling suddenly interrupted, his deep, resonant voice instantly silencing Bradley's pathetic tantrum. The Apex chief executive leaned forward, resting his elbows on the black marble. "My elite internal legal division spent the last 3 hours forensically dismantling these exact documents. They verified every single line of code and every single legal precedent. Vanguard Pay has absolutely zero legal standing. You own absolutely nothing. Your entire corporate valuation was entirely built on a massive fraudulent lie." Cameron began to openly weep, sliding slowly down the glass wall until he was practically sitting on the floor holding his head in his hands. Bradley stared at Mr. Sterling, his arrogant, polished facade finally cracking into a pathetic mask of pure terror. "But the acquisition," Bradley pleaded, his voice dropping into a desperate whisper. "We have a signed letter of intent. We are scheduled to finalize the $500 million merger this exact afternoon." "We were scheduled to finalize a merger," Mr. Sterling corrected him, a cold, predatory smile returning to his weathered face. "But Apex Global is no longer interested in acquiring a hollow shell company entirely managed by incompetent executives who actively alienate their only valuable technical assets. I officially canceled the Vanguard acquisition 20 minutes ago." The absolute silence in the boardroom was utterly deafening. Bradley looked like he had been physically struck by a massive speeding freight train. "If you canceled our acquisition, then why are we even here?" He choked out, the remaining color draining rapidly from his face. "Why did you summon us to this building?" "I summoned you so you could personally witness the massive fatal consequences of your own profound arrogance," Mr. Sterling replied, gesturing elegantly toward me. "Apex Global does not need to acquire Vanguard Pay to secure the network integration software. We simply bypassed your fragile, failing infrastructure entirely. This morning, Apex Global executed a massive direct private acquisition. We formally purchased the absolute exclusive global rights to the core algorithm directly from Nora's newly established private limited liability corporation." I looked directly at Bradley, allowing a slow, razor-sharp smile to finally form on my face. The power dynamic had completely inverted. The toxic men who had spent nearly a decade aggressively suppressing my talent, stealing my financial compensation, and violently threatening my future were now completely powerless. They had arrogant titles and expensive suits, but I held the absolute keys to the entire digital kingdom. I watched Bradley process the absolute devastation of his empire. The massive payday he had ruthlessly planned to steal from my personal labor was currently sitting in a highly secure private account registered exclusively under my name. I had not just defeated them in a simple corporate boardroom. I had entirely eradicated their professional existence. Purchasing the algorithm was merely the first phase of our business this morning. Mr. Sterling continued, his voice dropping into a register of absolute finality. The executive board at Apex Global recognizes rare, exceptional talent when we actively see it. We do not just buy revolutionary software. We acquire the brilliant minds that actually create it. As an explicit condition of our exclusive deal, I am incredibly pleased to announce that Nora has officially been appointed as the new Senior Director of Acquisitions for our entire global technology division. Bradley let out a pathetic, strangled gasp, as if the oxygen had been violently sucked directly from his lungs. Cameron simply stared blankly at the polished black marble table, his professional spirit completely and utterly broken. Therefore, Mr. Sterling concluded, leaning back in his heavy leather chair and steepling his fingers, the final ultimate decision regarding the pending $500 million acquisition of Vanguard Pay no longer rests with me. It is entirely up to our new director. She holds the absolute sole authority to either proceed with a deeply restructured buyout or let your company completely collapse under its own massive, suffocating debt. The massive boardroom fell into a heavy, agonizing silence. Bradley and Cameron were physically trapped, forced to sit perfectly still, while the woman they had relentlessly abused and manipulated held their entire financial future in the palm of her hand. I did not rush the incredible moment. I slowly opened a thin black folder resting on the marble in front of me and looked directly into Bradley's terrified, violently sweating face. "I have spent the last hour conducting a comprehensive emergency review of Vanguard Pay." I began, my voice ringing with cold, calculated authority. "The financial and ethical failings of your organization are absolutely staggering. You operate a highly toxic corporate environment structured entirely around executive theft and the aggressive suppression of technical female talent. Your human resources department actively weaponizes illegal contracts to enforce hostile compliance. Your senior vice president of sales possesses absolutely zero technical knowledge, rendering your primary client relations entirely fraudulent. And as of this morning, your massive catastrophic failure to secure fundamental intellectual property rights has resulted in an unprecedented client exodus." I let the brutal, undeniable truth hang heavily in the cold, conditioned air. "Vanguard Pay is not a viable technology company," I stated, closing the black folder with a sharp, definitive snap. "It is a massive financial liability managed by profoundly incompetent men. It brings absolutely zero structural value to the Apex Global portfolio." "Nora, please," Bradley begged, his arrogant voice finally reduced to a pathetic, whimpering whisper. "I will give you anything you want. I will give you half the entire company." "I already have everything, Bradley," I replied, staring right through his crumbling, desperate facade. As the Senior Director of Acquisitions for Apex Global, I am formally, completely, and permanently denying the acquisition of Vanguard Pay. We will not be purchasing your company for $500 million. We will not be purchasing your company for $5. I watched the last remaining shreds of life completely drain from their faces. The massive life-changing payday they had so aggressively plotted to steal from me instantly evaporated into absolute nothingness, leaving them completely trapped inside the dark, bankrupt shell of their ruined corporate empire. The aftermath was incredibly swift and absolutely brutal. Without the core integration algorithm and facing aggressive federal investigations, Vanguard Pay completely collapsed within a matter of weeks. The massive corporate exodus was instantaneous. Bradley was violently ousted by his own executive board, facing multiple civil lawsuits from furious shareholders. Cameron was officially fired on a Tuesday. Without me writing his technical manuals, he bombed every single interview and was permanently blacklisted from the entire financial technology industry. The devastation rapidly bled into my former family. Connor's massive professional failure triggered a catastrophic downward spiral. He lost his high-paying logistics job and rapidly accumulated staggering amounts of legal and financial debt. My parents, desperate to protect their precious golden boy, were forced to quietly sell their sprawling luxury suburban home to cover his massive mounting liabilities. Their perfectly curated country club social standing evaporated overnight. They tried to crawl back exactly 1 month later. I was sitting at my massive mahogany desk when the primary security desk for the Apex Global building called my direct line. The guard informed me that an older couple claiming to be my parents was aggressively demanding to see me in the main lobby. I looked at the live security feed on my monitor, watching them nervously clutch their expensive coats, looking incredibly small and pathetic in the towering marble atrium. I pressed the intercom button and delivered my final absolute judgment. I do not know those people, I told the guard calmly. Have them permanently removed from the premises. I watched the security team escort them out into the freezing Chicago rain, severing that toxic dead weight from my life forever. Naomi executed her own flawless exit strategy. She officially filed for divorce from Connor, completely blinding him with an ironclad prenuptial agreement she had forced him to sign years ago. Utilizing her massive cut of the Vanguard settlement fees, she immediately launched her own high-end intellectual property law firm situated exactly 3 floors directly below my new office. Later that evening, Naomi and I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office. The sprawling Chicago skyline glittered brilliantly beneath us, a sprawling sea of endless bright possibilities. We gently clinked 2 heavy crystal flutes of expensive vintage champagne together, celebrating our absolute unquestionable victory. We had successfully beaten a deeply toxic system at its own aggressive game. We did not just survive the blatant manipulation and the calculated corporate theft. We aggressively weaponized their own profound arrogance against them and completely dismantled their entire empire piece by piece. When people actively try to take your inherent worth, do not ever politely ask for it back. Take their entire kingdom. Have you ever dealt with a highly toxic boss or a manipulative family that actively tried to hold you back from your true potential? Let me know your story in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe.